Hello, everyone, and we are here with our final lecture for this week talking about the writing assignment that will be due this Sunday around midnight, which is on queer and feminist media and political rhetoric analysis. So, just a summary again, it's due this Sunday. It's 2 to 3 pages, and by 2 to 3 pages, I do mean that the minimum is 2 pages, and they have to be a full 2 pages, okay? It does need to be double spaced, as well as separate works cited. And then, very important, just as you can tell by the themes that have been going on with our other writing assignments, that you must use at least one reading from this week's readings. So, in this assignment, you're going to select either a suggested issue topic in the news or one that of your own choosing. You will then do a review of media discussions and or political speeches, tweets, discussions surrounding the issue, in order to then interrogate how Rubin's charm circle and that's very important, and Rich's compulsory heterosexuality are implicated, reinforced in these discussions. You will then, in your paper, discuss how the issue is framed in order to create a hierarchy of sexuality and reinforce sexual and gender norms in order to make individuals implicated by these issues, all of them being laws or so forth, as either deviant, sick, or otherwise. So, very much this topic is about looking at how a certain issue, a bill, or so forth, is framed and how that is used to then also reinforce this sexual gender hierarchy and this compulsory heteronormativity, really, of compulsory heterosexuality. So I listed in the assignment a couple suggested policy issues, because they would be, one is that they very much have been in the news a lot, and so you can have a lot of resources to talk about them. Also because they very much are around controlling sexuality or gender and so forth. So the first one is just the various states' bathroom bills banning transgender individuals from using the bathrooms of their preference. There has been, once these bills were introduced or passed, there's been a lot of incredible blowback and discussion around it. So I want you to look at all of the discourse around it, both the people who are pro-bathroom bill as well as the people who have criticized it and tried to repeal these bills. The other one that I suggested that's very much close to home is Indiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which many see as the precursor to the religious tolerance new ordinance passed by the presidency. And this bill is very much similar to that tolerance bill in the sense of that people should not have to do anything that would jeopardize their religious beliefs, morale, and so forth. The other sort of example is laws criminalizing prostitution in Indiana. You could also look at other parts of the country as well. I mean, because it's pretty much banned throughout the whole entire country, but there's a lot of discussion around that, and again, it is regulating sex, essentially. And then another one that might be interesting, something that's that we don't really think about, are the various state laws. Indiana has laws around this, around adultery and bigamy, that are supposed to address, I guess, adultery, and I guess bigamy in the sense of it's always framed as a male person having multiple wives, but these laws actually have a direct impact, a very negative impact, on consensual polyamory relationships. Now, those suggestions that I have, you don't have to do them. If you rather explore something else, totally fine. But I do suggest that you try to find your example that definitely is about regulating sexuality and or gender, okay? Just because then it'll be much more easier for you to then discuss and talk about how Rubin's Charm Circle and Adrian Rich's compulsory heterosexuality is implicated in it. Okay, so I mean, obviously, there's many other laws and examples out there, but try to find stuff that at least is, at the very least, about regulating, disciplining sexuality and gender. So other examples that I didn't include in my suggestion is that there's been this new, one is that there's been a lot of discussion around conversion therapy. When Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, he actually gave a lot of funding to conversion therapists, and allowed them to basically open up shop in a much broader sense. But there are actually new laws coming out, a new law in California, or I don't think it's been passed yet, around banning conversion therapy and so forth. Of course, so that's one example. Another one is around access to reproductive care, particularly abortion, which is very much around regulating sexuality and gender. So that's a very big example where I think you could easily sort of talk about how the various draconian laws around abortion access and services and so forth, and discussions around it, reinforce Gail Rubin's charmed circle around sex, that sex should only be for marriage, right? And only for procreation. God forbid a married couple actually wants to seek an abortion because that's their right. To, Adrian Rich's compulsory heterosexuality, that, you in these debates, they're assuming that everybody who's getting an abortion and so forth is heterosexual. Another one is around the various tricky laws that are there to regulate sex acts, which we've talked about a little bit, that many within the BDSM community have talked about and have argued against, around that they jeopardize their sexual freedom between two consenting adults. Another one is just on consent. There is a wide variety of consent laws, sexual consent laws, not only around like what is the age of consent, but then also how consent is defined, and it drastically varies from state to state, to the point that in one state you could actually, a person who has been sexually assaulted can get their, have their case be thrown out because what happened didn't fit like the very limited idea of consent for that state. And so then they say that it was consensual even though it wasn't non-consensual. Two, if they just literally went an hour to the next border, to the next state border, to the next state, they could actually get their due justice and have their rapists prosecuted. That's just all other examples that you could look at. I've given you some suggestions because I know that they've been in the news and they're interesting and you can find a lot of resources. But of course, if you want to explore something else, totally. But again, my suggestion is that you try to focus as much as possible on a topic that is directly regulating, implicating, so forth on sexuality and or gender. So once you've selected your topic, whether it's the suggested one or the one that you want to do on your own, please then do a search of media, and or political rhetoric, because, it seems like media and political rhetoric are one and the same. Politicians are on the news our news anchors are politicians almost. It's very blurred now concerning the issue. And next you will then summarize the main points or repeated arguments surrounding the issue that you selected. Then you will write a reflection paper on how the discourse surrounding the issue, as well as the issue itself, reinforces Gail Rubin's charm circle, and you have to do both, Adrian Rich's compulsory heterosexuality. So it's not an and or, it's an and. You need to both address charm circle and compulsory heterosexuality. Now, for some tips on this assignment, I suggest looking at least to 4 media examples or political discussions, okay? So, only so that you can then have a lot to work with. So don't just look at one and then write about it. You should look at least for. And media examples, I also suggest that you look at various different types from different sort of media outlets, from the very, very conservative, like Fox News, to kind of like a more medium, which is like NPR, PBS, though I guess a lot of people criticize that that's not medium, but okay. I say that it's medium, to more sort of liberal news outlets, like, for example, people talk about MSNBC being very liberal. I don't know how that is, but basically, I just don't want you to just look at one, because the way that they frame an issue will vary drastically from even what news station you are to what news source you're looking at. And then also the same for politicians, right? So I do want you to look at a range from the very, very super conservative, which you can already guess what their opinion is on this, to a bit more liberal, middle ground, and so forth. So once you've collected your media and you've looked at it and so forth, I want you to then address these questions in your paper. Number 1, how is the issue framed in the media and or in politics? What does this framing do to contextualize, portray the issue? And what does this framing do to the portrayal of the individuals involved, implicated by this issue? Because remember that all these things, whether it's the bathroom bills to the bigamy laws and so forth, affect people's daily lives. Like, they're not just sort of abstract issues. They affect literally the very life of you. 2, how does the political rhetoric or media discussions work to reinforce sexual and gender hierarchies and norms? 3, how do you see the charm circle being reinforced in the discussions about the issue? And then lastly, how do you see compulsory heterosexuality being reinforced in the discussions surrounding this issue? So I want you to address all of these questions in your paper. So again, review. Select the topics, the ones that are suggested or your own. Again, to make sure that if you do want to go on your own, that whatever topic that you have is around sexuality and gender. Don't do something that doesn't work around that, because it's going to be very hard to then try to connect the charm circle and compulsory heterosexuality to it. And then after you select your topic, do a media search, political rhetoric search, discussion, tweets are included in this around this topic. And I suggest, again, using at least 4 examples for best results, basically for you to have a lot to work with in writing your paper. And then once you have that, do an analysis on how the topic is framed, how the topic and the discourse surrounding it feeds into Gail Rubin's charm circle and Adrienne Rich's compulsory heterosexuality. Remember, again, that you must use at least one of the week's readings in your analysis, and you must address both Rubin's charm circle and Rich's compulsory heterosexuality.